Chapter 1. The Hidden Enemy in Your Bank Account. You're anxious about money? And that anxiety is making you worse with money? Right now, you're worried about the bills you have to pay, the debt you're carrying, the retirement you're not saving for, the emergency that might happen. And that worry, that constant financial anxiety, is driving emotional decisions that destroy your financial future. Here's why this matters. The Stoics understood something crucial about wealth that modern financial advice ignores. They knew that how you think about money determines how you behave with money, and your behavior with money determines whether you build wealth or stay trapped in financial stress. You can't fix your finances without first fixing your mind. Let me show you what's really happening. You receive your paycheck and immediately feel anxiety about whether it's enough. That anxiety triggers impulse spending to relieve the stress. You see your credit card balance and panic, which makes you avoid looking at it, which makes the problem worse. You think about retirement and feel overwhelmed, so you do nothing. Every financial decision is driven by emotion, not reason. And emotion is destroying you financially. Pay attention to this part. The Stoics, ancient philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, lived 2,000 years ago but understood human psychology better than most modern financial advisors. They taught that external events don't control you, your judgments about those events control you. You're not stressed because you have debt. You're stressed because of how you're thinking about debt. Here's what makes emotional financial thinking so dangerous. It creates a cycle of reactivity. You feel anxious, so you spend to feel better temporarily. That spending creates more problems. Those problems create more anxiety. More anxiety leads to more emotional spending. The cycle continues, and you never escape because you're always reacting to feelings instead of acting from reason. Most people never realize their financial problems are thinking problems, not money problems. They believe they need more income to solve their stress. But people with higher incomes often have the same financial stress because they're making the same emotional decisions at a higher dollar amount. More money doesn't fix emotional spending. It just makes emotional spending more expensive. This is where things change. Stoic philosophy offers a completely different approach to financial decisions. Instead of letting emotions drive choices, you learn to observe emotions without being controlled by them. Instead of reacting to circumstances, you choose your response deliberately. Instead of focusing on what you can't control, you direct energy toward what you can control. Think about two people facing the same financial setback: unexpected car repair, medical bill, job loss. The first person panics, borrows money they can't afford, makes desperate decisions that create more problems. The second person accepts what happened, calmly evaluates options, makes the best decision available with the resources they have. Same circumstance, completely different outcome, based entirely on thinking. Here's the shift you need to make immediately. Stop letting your emotions about money make your financial decisions. Start recognizing that between stimulus and response, there's a space. Something happens financially, you see a bill, you want something, you hear bad news. In that space between the trigger and your reaction, you have choice. And that choice is where financial freedom lives. But there's a psychological challenge here. You've been making emotional financial decisions for so long that it feels normal. Spending to relieve stress feels natural. Avoiding problems feels protective. Impulsive decisions feel necessary. But natural and necessary aren't the same as helpful. These patterns are comfortable, but they're destroying your financial life. Most people won't adopt Stoic thinking about money because it requires uncomfortable honesty. It means admitting that your financial problems aren't just about circumstances. They're about choices driven by emotions you're not managing. That admission feels like blame. But it's actually empowerment, because if your choices created your situation, different choices can change it. Here's what happens when you apply Stoic principles to finances. First, you notice the emotional triggers that drive bad decisions: anxiety, fear, desire, boredom, stress. Second, You practice creating space between trigger and response instead of reacting automatically. Third, you make financial decisions based on what serves your long-term goals, not what relieves immediate emotional discomfort. And fourth, you build wealth because your decisions are consistent with your values instead of inconsistent reactions to feelings. And here's the part that changes everything. When you stop letting emotions control your financial decisions, money stops being a source of constant stress. You still have financial challenges, but you're not amplifying them with emotional reactivity. You respond to problems calmly, make better decisions, and build financial stability that emotional decision-making never creates. So here's what you do starting right now. The next time you're about to make a financial decision, buying something, checking your accounts, paying bills, pause. Just for 5 seconds. Notice what you're feeling. Anxiety? Desire? Stress? Then ask, is this decision based on emotion or reason? Will this choice serve my long-term financial goals? That simple pause is the beginning of Stoic financial practice. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are destroying their financial lives with emotional reactions they don't even notice. They spend when anxious, avoid when afraid, impulse buy when stressed, and wonder why they never get ahead financially. Meanwhile, people who practice Stoic thinking build wealth not because they earn more, but because they decide better. The question you need to answer is this: are you willing to take responsibility for the emotions driving your financial decisions? Or will you continue blaming circumstances while remaining financially trapped? Because circumstances are often beyond your control. But your response to circumstances, that's entirely within your control. And that response determines your financial future. Chapter 2, The Power of What You Control. Now, you're focused on what you can't control, and it's paralyzing your financial progress. You worry about the economy, inflation, market crashes, whether your company will downsize, if taxes will increase. And while you're consumed with anxiety about these uncontrollable factors, you're ignoring the controllable factors that actually determine your financial success. Here's why this matters. The Stoics taught a fundamental principle called the dichotomy of control. There are things you control and things you don't control. Wasting energy on what you don't control is pointless and exhausting. Directing energy toward what you do control is powerful and productive. And in personal finance, most people have this exactly backwards. Let me show you what's really happening. You can't control the economy. You can't control inflation. You can't control market returns. You can't control your employer's decisions. But you can control your spending. You can control your saving rate. You can control your investment choices. You can control your skill development. Yet you spend mental energy worrying about the uncontrollable while neglecting the controllable. Pay attention to this part. Every hour you spend worrying about the economy is an hour you're not spending improving your budget. Every minute of anxiety about market volatility is a minute you're not using to increase your income. Worrying about what you can't control doesn't prepare you, it paralyzes you. And paralysis prevents the very actions that would improve your financial situation. Here's what makes focusing on the uncontrollable so destructive. It creates learned helplessness. If you believe your financial fate is determined by external forces, the economy, your employer, the market, luck, then you're powerless. And when you feel powerless, you don't take action. You just react to whatever happens, hoping things work out. That's not a financial strategy, that's surrender disguised as realism. Most people focus on the uncontrollable because it feels safer than taking responsibility for the controllable. If your financial problems are caused by the economy or your employer or the system, then it's not your fault. You're off the hook. But that psychological comfort costs you your financial future because you're not acting on the things you can actually change. This is where things change. The Stoic approach to money is ruthlessly pragmatic. You identify what you control, you focus your energy there, and you accept what you don't control without wasting energy fighting it. That clarity, knowing exactly where your power lies, is what enables effective action. Think about two people facing economic uncertainty. The first person spends hours consuming news about inflation, complaining about the economy, feeling anxious about market volatility. The second person accepts that the economy is uncertain, then focuses energy on increasing their savings rate, developing new income streams, and building emergency reserves. Same economic environment, completely different use of mental energy, totally different financial outcomes. Here's the shift you need to make. Stop spending mental energy on financial factors outside your control. Start directing that energy toward the financial factors you do control. You don't control the market, but you control how much you invest. You don't control inflation, but you control your spending. You don't control your employer, but you control your skill development and income diversification. But there's a psychological barrier here. Accepting that you don't control external factors feels like giving up. You want to believe that worry prepares you, that anxiety protects you, that consuming financial news gives you an edge. But worry isn't preparation. Anxiety isn't protection. And news consumption doesn't improve your financial decisions. It usually makes them worse by triggering emotional reactions. Most people won't adopt the dichotomy of control because it requires releasing the illusion of control over external factors. They want to believe they can predict market movements, time economic cycles, or influence their employer's decisions through worry. But you can't. And pretending you can just waste energy that should go toward the factors you actually control. Here's what happens when you focus exclusively on controllable factors. First, anxiety decreases because you're not wasting energy on things you can't influence. Second, action increases because you're directing energy toward things you can change. Third, results improve because consistent action on controllable factors produces measurable progress. And fourth, you develop genuine financial confidence because it's based on your actions, not on hoping external circumstances cooperate. And here's the part that changes everything. When you master the dichotomy of control in your finances, you become anti-fragile. Market volatility doesn't destroy you because you've built multiple income streams. Economic downturns don't panic you because you have emergency reserves. Employer decisions don't devastate you because you've developed marketable skills. You've built financial security based on what you control, not on hoping the uncontrollable stays favorable. So here's what you do starting today. Make 2 lists. First list, financial factors I cannot control. Include economy, market returns, employer decisions, inflation, taxes. Second list, financial factors I can control. Include spending habits, savings rate, income development, investment choices, skill building, debt management. Then commit to this. Spend 0 mental energy on list 1 and all productive energy on list 2. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people spend 80% of their mental energy worrying about financial factors they don't control and 20% acting on factors they do control. That ratio guarantees mediocre results and maximum anxiety. Successful people invert this. They spend 95% of energy on controllable factors and accept uncontrollable factors without wasting energy fighting them. The question you need to answer is this: are you going to continue wasting energy on the economy, the market, and other uncontrollable factors? Or will you direct all your energy toward the spending, saving, and earning decisions you actually control? Because one approach produces chronic anxiety with poor results. The other produces calm focus with improving results. Chapter 3, Breaking the Impulse Trap. You make financial decisions impulsively, and those impulses are destroying your wealth. You see something you want and you buy it immediately. You feel stressed and you spend to relieve the stress. You encounter a sale and you purchase without thinking. Every impulse is acting on you, controlling your money, preventing wealth accumulation. Here's why this matters. The Stoics practiced a discipline they called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. But they also practiced something equally important: the pause. The deliberate space between desire and action where reason can intervene. Without that pause, You're not making financial decisions, you're being controlled by impulses. Let me show you what's really happening. An impulse hits. You want coffee, you see a gadget, you notice a sale, you feel stressed that spending might relieve. And you act immediately. The impulse triggers the action with no space for evaluation. No consideration of whether this aligns with your goals. No assessment of whether you actually need it. Just stimulus and immediate response. That's not decision-making. That's being controlled by external triggers. Pay attention to this part. Impulse spending doesn't feel like a problem in the moment. Each instance is small. Coffee is $5. The gadget is $30. The sale item is $20. None of these feel significant. But $5 daily is $1,825 annually. Those small impulses compound into massive amounts that could have built wealth but instead disappeared into purchases you barely remember. Here's what makes impulsivity so financially destructive. It's death by 1,000 small decisions. No single impulse purchase destroys you. But the pattern of impulsive decision-making prevents wealth accumulation entirely. You can't build financial security if money flows out of your accounts as quickly as it flows in, controlled by whatever impulse strikes you in the moment. Most people never recognize impulsivity as their primary financial problem because each instance is small and feels justified. The coffee gives you energy. The gadget solves a problem. The sale is saving money. But these are rationalizations generated after the impulse, not reasons that guided a deliberate decision. Your brain is justifying the impulse, not making a reasoned choice. This is where things change. The Stoic practice is simple but powerful. Pause. Between impulse and action, create space. In that space, reason can operate. You can evaluate whether this purchase serves your long-term goals. You can assess whether you actually need it or just want it in the moment. You can choose deliberately instead of reacting automatically. Think about two people who walk past a store and see something they want. The first person feels the impulse and immediately buys. The second person feels the impulse, pauses, asks, "Do I need this? Does this align with my financial goals? Will I still want this tomorrow?" And often decides not to buy. Same impulse, completely different outcome, based entirely on whether they created space between desire and action. Here's the shift you need to make. Implement a mandatory pause before every non-essential purchase. See something you want? Wait 24 hours. Feel an impulse to spend? Write it down instead of acting on it. Encounter a sale? Walk away and reconsider later. That pause is where Stoic discipline defeats impulsive destruction. But there's a psychological challenge here. The pause feels like deprivation. You want something now and you're telling yourself to wait. That creates tension. It's uncomfortable. Your brain interprets the delay as denial and protests. But the pause isn't about denial, it's about ensuring that if you do buy, it's a choice you made deliberately, not a reaction you couldn't control. Most people won't implement the pause because immediate gratification is psychologically powerful. The reward is now. The consequences are later. Your brain is wired to prefer immediate rewards over delayed consequences. Overriding that wiring requires conscious effort. But that effort is exactly what separates people who build wealth from people who stay broke despite good incomes. Here's what happens when you implement the pause consistently. First, you notice how many impulses you have that you normally act on without awareness. The number is shocking. Second, most impulses fade during the pause. You realize you didn't actually want or need the thing once the emotional spike passed. Third, the purchases you do make after pausing feel more satisfying because they're deliberate choices, not impulse reactions. And fourth, money stays in your accounts and compounds because it's not leaking out through countless small impulses. And here's the part that changes everything. When you master the pause, you develop what the Stoics called voluntary discomfort. You're practicing the ability to want something and not immediately satisfy that want. That capacity, to delay gratification, to sit with desire without acting on it, is the foundation of every financial discipline. Save instead of spend. Invest instead of consume. Build instead of buy. All require this same muscle. So here's what you do starting immediately. Implement the 24-hour rule. Any non-essential purchase over $20 requires a 24-hour waiting period before buying. Feel the impulse. Write down what you want. Then wait. 24 hours later, reevaluate. You'll find that most impulses don't survive the pause. And the ones that do are choices you're making consciously, not reactions you couldn't control. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are hemorrhaging money through impulsive decisions they don't even remember making. They work hard, earn decent incomes, and wonder where all the money goes. It went to impulses. Hundreds of small, unconsidered reactions to momentary desires. Meanwhile, people who practice the pause build wealth from the same income because money isn't constantly escaping through impulse spending. The question you need to answer is this: are your purchases deliberate decisions aligned with your financial goals, or are they impulses you couldn't resist? Because one approach builds wealth. The other prevents it. And the only difference is the pause, the space between wanting and buying where reason can operate. Chapter 4. Escaping the comparison prison. You're comparing yourself to others, and it's making you broke. You see someone's new car and feel like you need a better car. You notice a colleague's vacation photos and feel pressure to take an expensive trip. You observe neighbors upgrading their home and suddenly your home feels inadequate. And this constant comparison is driving spending that destroys your financial future. Here's why this matters. The Stoics warned against measuring yourself by external standards set by others. Epictetus taught that you should define your own standard of what's enough rather than adopting standards imposed by society or social comparison. When you let other people's spending determine your spending, you've surrendered financial control to forces that don't care about your goals. Let me show you what's really happening. You're not actually dissatisfied with your car, your home, or your lifestyle, until you compare them to someone else's. The comparison creates artificial dissatisfaction. That dissatisfaction creates desire for things you didn't want until comparison triggered the want. And that desire drives spending that your financial situation can't support but your ego demands. Pay attention to this part. The people you're comparing yourself to might be broke. That nice car might have a payment they can't afford. That vacation might be on credit cards. That home upgrade might have maxed their debt. You're destroying your financial stability to keep up with people who might be destroying theirs. You're in a race where everyone's running toward bankruptcy while pretending to run toward success. Here's what makes comparison spending so destructive. It's a moving target that you can never hit. There will always be someone with more, something newer, somewhere nicer. If you're defining enough based on comparison to others, enough never arrives. You'll spend your entire life chasing a standard that moves every time you get close, hemorrhaging money trying to match an image that's often an illusion. Most people fall into comparison spending because it's reinforced by social media and culture. You're constantly exposed to other people's highlight reels, their purchases, their experiences, their possessions. What you don't see is their debt, their stress, their financial fragility behind the image. So you compare your behind-the-scenes reality to their curated highlight reel and feel inadequate. This is where things change. The Stoic approach is to define your own standard of enough based on your values and goals, not based on what others have. What do you actually need to live a good life? What truly matters to you versus what you think should matter because others have it? That clarity, knowing your own standard, is what breaks the comparison trap. Think about two people with the same income. The first person constantly compares to others, spending money to match their peers' visible lifestyle while accumulating debt and stress. The second person defines enough based on personal values, lives below that standard comfortably, and builds wealth. Same income, completely different financial trajectories, based entirely on whether they're living by internal or external standards. Here's the shift you need to make. Stop using other people as your financial measuring stick. Start defining what enough means for you based on what actually matters to you. not what impresses others. Your car is enough if it safely transports you, not if it matches your neighbors. Your home is enough if it comfortably houses your family, not if it's as large as your colleagues. But there's a psychological barrier here. Defining your own standard feels like losing. If you stop trying to match others, you feel like you're falling behind. If you drive a modest car while your peer drives a luxury car, you feel inferior. But that feeling is the trap. You're letting other people's choices determine your sense of adequacy. That's not freedom, that's imprisonment by other people's standards. Most people won't break free from comparison because it requires accepting that you'll sometimes have less than others by visible measures while having more by invisible measures like savings, investments, and financial security. That trade, less visible wealth for more actual wealth, feels like losing until you realize that visible wealth is often fake while actual wealth is freedom. Here's what happens when you stop comparing and define your own standard. First, spending pressure decreases dramatically. You're not constantly feeling like you need to upgrade, match, or keep up. Second, contentment increases because you're satisfied with enough rather than perpetually dissatisfied by comparison. Third, money stays in your accounts and compounds because you're not spending to impress or match others. And fourth, you build actual financial security while people you were comparing yourself to are building impressive images on fragile financial foundations. And here's the part that changes everything. When you stop measuring yourself by others' standards, you discover what actually matters to you. Maybe you don't care about cars but love travel. Maybe you don't value a large home but value time freedom. You can allocate resources toward what you actually value instead of spreading them across everything society says you should value. That alignment between spending and values is where genuine satisfaction lives. So here's what you do starting today. Write down your own definition of enough for the major spending categories: housing, transportation, experiences, possessions. Base this on what actually improves your life, not on what you think you should want based on others. Then commit to living by your standard regardless of what others do or have. That commitment is the beginning of financial freedom from comparison. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are destroying their financial lives trying to impress people they don't even like with things they don't even want. They're spending money they don't have to buy things they don't need to impress people who don't care. And they're doing it because they've outsourced their definition of enough to social comparison instead of internal values. The question you need to answer is this: are you going to define enough based on your values, or let other people's possessions define it for you? Because one approach leads to contentment and wealth. The other leads to perpetual dissatisfaction and debt. And the only difference is whether you're living by internal or external standards. Chapter 5: The Art of Responding to Setbacks. You're devastated by financial setbacks, and that devastation is making the setbacks worse. The car breaks down and you spiral into despair. You lose your job and you collapse into paralysis. An unexpected bill arrives and you panic. And these emotional reactions to setbacks, the catastrophizing, the panic, the despair, prevent you from responding effectively, which amplifies the damage. Here's why this matters. The Stoics understood that external events are neutral. It's our judgment about events that creates suffering. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been." This isn't denial. It's recognizing that your interpretation of setbacks determines whether they destroy you or just inconvenience you. Let me show you what's really happening. A financial setback occurs: unexpected expense, income loss, investment loss, whatever. That's the event. But you add judgment to the event. This is terrible. This ruins everything. I can't handle this. This proves I'm bad with money. The event is neutral. Your judgment creates the suffering. And that suffering paralyzes you, preventing effective response. Pay attention to this part. Financial setbacks are inevitable. If you're alive, you'll face unexpected expenses, income disruptions, market downturns, and financial surprises. But setbacks don't determine your financial trajectory, Your response to setbacks determines your trajectory. And if your response is emotional collapse rather than calm problem solving, every setback becomes compounded by your reaction to it. Here's what makes catastrophizing setbacks so destructive. It wastes mental energy on suffering that could be used for solving. While you're despairing about how terrible this is, you're not evaluating options. While you're panicking about worst-case scenarios, you're not taking constructive action. The setback is one problem. Your emotional reaction creates a second, often larger problem. Most people catastrophize financial setbacks because they confuse temporary problems with permanent disasters. A car repair isn't a disaster, it's an expense. A job loss isn't the end, it's a transition. An unexpected bill isn't a catastrophe, it's a problem that requires a solution. But when you label temporary problems as disasters, you trigger emotional responses appropriate for disasters, which prevents effective responses appropriate for problems. This is where things change. The Stoic practice is to separate fact from interpretation. What actually happened? Just the facts, without emotional labels. Then, what's within my control in this situation? Not, this is terrible and ruins everything, but, this happened, here's what I can control, here's my best available action. That clarity prevents emotional amplification of setbacks. Think about two people who face the same financial setback. Let's say $1,000 unexpected car repair. The first person catastrophizes. This is a disaster. I can't afford this. This proves I'm terrible with money. My life is falling apart. They spiral emotionally, make desperate decisions, perhaps take expensive debt. The second person accepts. This happened. It's inconvenient. What are my options? I can adjust my budget, use savings, or find extra income. Which is best? Same setback. Completely different outcomes based on interpretation. Here's the shift you need to make. When financial setbacks occur, practice Stoic cognitive reframing. First, identify just the facts without emotional interpretation. Second, recognize what you can and cannot control. Third, focus your energy exclusively on what you can control. Fourth, take the best available action with the resources you have. No catastrophizing. No despair. Just problem solving. But there's a psychological challenge here. Reframing feels like minimizing or denying the seriousness of problems. You think you should be upset because the problem is real. But being upset doesn't solve the problem. It just adds emotional suffering to practical challenges. The problem is real. Your catastrophic interpretation of the problem is optional. Most people won't practice reframing because emotional reactions feel justified. Something bad happened, so feeling bad feels appropriate. But feeling bad serves no practical purpose. It doesn't solve problems. It doesn't improve circumstances. It just makes you feel worse while accomplishing nothing constructive. Meanwhile, calm problem solving addresses the actual issue. Here's what happens when you practice Stoic reframing of setbacks. First, emotional suffering from setbacks decreases dramatically. You still face challenges, but you're not amplifying them with catastrophic thinking. Second, problem solving improves because mental energy goes towards solutions instead of towards suffering. Third, financial resilience develops because you prove to yourself that setbacks are manageable, not catastrophic. And fourth, actual outcomes improve because effective responses produce better results than emotional reactions. And here's the part that changes everything. When you master Stoic reframing, financial setbacks lose their power to devastate you. You develop genuine equanimity, not because nothing bad happens, but because you've learned that events are neutral and your response determines outcomes. That equanimity is unshakable financial confidence that circumstances can't destroy. So here's what you do with your next financial setback. When it happens, and it will happen, pause before reacting. Write down just the facts without emotional labels. Then write, what can I control in this situation? Then write, what's my best available action? Then take that action. No catastrophizing. No panic. Just calm, reasoned response. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people make financial setbacks infinitely worse through catastrophic thinking and emotional reactions. A $500 problem becomes a $5,000 problem because panic drove poor decisions. A temporary inconvenience becomes a lasting disaster because despair prevented effective action. Meanwhile, people who practice Stoic reframing handle the same setbacks calmly and move forward. The question you need to answer is this: when financial setbacks occur, will you amplify them with catastrophic thinking, or will you respond calmly with effective problem solving? Because setbacks themselves rarely destroy finances. It's the panicked, emotional reactions to setbacks that compound problems into disasters. Chapter 6: Resisting the Upgrade Trap. You're constantly upgrading your lifestyle, and it's preventing wealth accumulation. Every time your income increases, your spending increases to match it. Better apartment, nicer car, more expensive restaurants, upgraded everything. And this constant lifestyle inflation means you never build financial security because every dollar you earn immediately becomes a dollar you spend. Here's why this matters. The Stoics practiced voluntary simplicity and questioned hedonic adaptation, the human tendency to return to baseline happiness regardless of improved circumstances. Seneca warned against luxury that becomes necessity. When you constantly upgrade your lifestyle, you're running on a treadmill where more income never creates more security, just more expensive obligations. Let me show you what's really happening. You get a raise. Immediately, you upgrade something, move to a nicer place, buy a better car, increase discretionary spending. Your expenses rise to meet your new income. Then you need that higher income to maintain your new lifestyle. You're not getting ahead. You're just maintaining a more expensive version of the same trapped position. Pay attention to this part. The gap between your income and your spending is the only number that matters for wealth building. Earn $50,000 and spend $40,000? You have $10,000 to save and invest. Earn $100,000 and spend $95,000? You have $5,000 to save and invest. The person earning half as much is building wealth twice as fast because they have greater gap, not greater income. Here's what makes lifestyle inflation so destructive. It feels like progress. You're living better, nicer things, better experiences, upgraded everything. But you're no more financially secure. One job loss, one medical emergency, one economic downturn, and you're in the same precarious position you were before the income increases, just with more expensive obligations that are harder to maintain. Most people succumb to lifestyle inflation because they confuse living better with doing better. They think the nicer car and bigger apartment mean they're successful. But those things don't indicate financial success, they indicate higher spending. Success is measured by the gap between income and expenses, not by the quality of your consumption. This is where things change. The Stoic approach is to question whether lifestyle upgrades actually improve your life or just create new baselines that require more money to maintain. That new car, does it actually make you happier than your old car, or did you just adapt to it within weeks? That bigger apartment, does it genuinely improve your life, or is it just more expensive space you don't use? Think about two people who both received $20,000 annual raises. The first person immediately upgrades their lifestyle, better apartment for an extra $1,000 monthly, nicer car payment, increased discretionary spending. Their expenses increase by $20,000 annually. The second person maintains their lifestyle and invests the entire raise. 5 years later, the first person has a nicer lifestyle but the same financial fragility. The second person has over $100,000 invested plus compound growth. Same race, completely different financial trajectories. Here's the shift you need to make. When your income increases, resist automatic lifestyle inflation. Live on your previous income and direct increases to savings and investments. Not forever, but until you've built genuine financial security. Once you have substantial assets generating passive income, then you can upgrade sustainably. But upgrading before building assets just ensures you never build assets. But there's a psychological barrier here. Maintaining your lifestyle when income increases feels like deprivation. You're earning more but living the same. Friends and family might question why you're not enjoying your success. You might feel like you're denying yourself rewards you've earned. But this temporary restraint is what creates permanent financial freedom. Most people won't resist lifestyle inflation because social pressure and hedonic adaptation are powerful. Society expects you to upgrade when you earn more. Your brain adapts to your current lifestyle and wants upgrades. Fighting both requires conscious discipline that most people won't maintain. So they spend every raise and wonder why they never feel financially secure. Here's what happens when you resist lifestyle inflation. First, it feels restrictive. You're earning more but not spending more. That's uncomfortable. Second, you maintain that discipline despite discomfort and direct income increases to investments. Third, assets compound and passive income grows. And fourth, you eventually reach a point where passive income covers expenses, and you're financially free. You can upgrade then if you want, but you don't need to because security matters more than luxury. And here's the part that changes everything. The Stoics understood that happiness comes from internal sources, not external upgrades. A nicer car doesn't make you happier for more than a few weeks. A bigger apartment doesn't increase life satisfaction long term. But financial security, the knowledge that you don't need to work, that setbacks can't destroy you, that you have true freedom, that creates lasting peace. Resist lifestyle inflation long enough to build security, and you'll have what luxury upgrades never provide. So here's what you do with your next income increase. Before spending any of it, decide, what percentage goes to wealth building? 50% minimum. 75% if you're serious about freedom. Then automate that amount to savings and investments immediately. Lifestyle inflation becomes impossible when the money isn't accessible for spending. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people will earn millions over their working lives and end with nothing because they spent every raise on lifestyle upgrades. They had nice things for decades but never built security. Meanwhile, people who resist lifestyle inflation might live modestly but retire wealthy and free because they understood the gap between income and spending is everything. The question you need to answer is this: do you want temporary lifestyle upgrades that impress others, or permanent financial security that frees you? Because income increases give you exactly one chance to choose. Spend the increase and you've chosen upgraded lifestyle with continued financial fragility. Save and invest the increase and you've chosen eventual financial freedom. Chapter 7, Releasing Financial Regret. You're stuck in financial regret, and it's preventing better future decisions. You regret the money you wasted. You regret the debt you accumulated. You regret the investments you didn't make. You regret the opportunities you missed. And this constant dwelling on past financial mistakes is consuming mental energy that should be directed toward present financial choices. Here's why this matters. The Stoics understood that past events are beyond your control. Marcus Aurelius taught that you should focus on the present moment because that's where your power resides. Financial regret about the past doesn't change the past. It just pollutes the present with guilt and shame that prevent effective action now. Let me show you what's really happening. You made financial mistakes. Everyone has. Maybe you accumulated credit card debt. Maybe you spent money on things you didn't need. Maybe you missed investment opportunities. Those are facts. But you've added interpretation. I'm terrible with money. I always make bad decisions. I've ruined my financial future. The past mistakes are unchangeable facts. Your shame and regret are present choices that serve no useful purpose. Pay attention to this part. Every moment you spend dwelling on past financial mistakes is a moment you're not spending making better present financial decisions. Regret is mentally expensive. It consumes cognitive resources. It triggers anxiety and shame. And those emotional states make you worse at financial decision-making, not better. Your regret about past mistakes is increasing the likelihood of future mistakes. Here's what makes financial regret so destructive. It creates a negative spiral. You feel bad about past mistakes, which decreases your sense of financial self-efficacy. That decreased confidence makes you less likely to take constructive financial action now. That inaction creates more problems. More problems create more regret. The cycle continues, and you stay stuck because you're focused on what you can't change instead of what you can change. Most people stay trapped in financial regret because it feels responsible. You think you should feel bad about mistakes. You think guilt will prevent future mistakes. You think regret shows you've learned. But none of that is true. Guilt doesn't improve decision-making, it impairs it. Regret doesn't prevent future mistakes. It often causes them through decreased confidence and avoidance behaviors. This is where things change. The Stoic practice is radical acceptance of the past combined with total focus on present choices. Yes, you made mistakes. Those mistakes are facts. You can't change them. What you can change is your present financial behavior. And every moment spent on regret is a moment stolen from present action. Think about two people who both accumulated $20,000 in credit card debt through past mistakes. The first person dwells on the regret. I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did this. I've ruined everything. That guilt paralyzes them, and they make minimum payments while avoiding looking at the balance. 5 years later, they still have significant debt because regret prevented action. The second person accepts what happened without judgment. I made mistakes. That's past. What's my best action now? Then creates a payoff plan and executes it. 5 years later, they're debt-free. Same starting mistake. Completely different outcomes based on whether they stayed stuck in regret or moved to action. Here's the shift you need to make. When financial regret appears, practice this Stoic exercise, acknowledge the fact without the emotional judgment. I spent $10,000 on things I didn't need, is a fact. I'm stupid and terrible with money, is judgment that doesn't help. Accept the fact. Release the judgment. Then ask, what's my best available financial action right now? And do that. But there's a psychological barrier here. Releasing regret feels like letting yourself off the hook. You think you should feel bad. You think guilt is how you show you've learned. But guilt and learning are separate. You can learn from mistakes without carrying shame. In fact, you'll learn better without shame because shame impairs cognitive function. Most people won't release financial regret because they're using it as protection against future mistakes. If I feel bad enough about past mistakes, I won't repeat them. But that logic is backwards. Shame and guilt make you worse at decision-making, not better. Calm acceptance of past mistakes combined with commitment to better present choices. That's what prevents future mistakes. Here's what happens when you release financial regret and focus on present action. First, emotional weight lifts. You're no longer carrying guilt and shame about unchangeable past. Second, decision-making improves because you're operating from calm clarity instead of anxious guilt. Third, present financial actions become more effective because your full cognitive capacity is available instead of being consumed by regret. And fourth, actual financial results improve because effective present action matters more than perfect past action. And here's the part that changes everything. When you master release of financial regret, you develop what the Stoics called a more fatty love of fate. Not love of your mistakes, but acceptance that everything that happened was necessary to bring you to this moment where you can choose differently. Your past financial mistakes taught you valuable lessons. They created the motivation for change. They were necessary, even if painful. Accept them, learn from them, then focus entirely on present choices. So here's what you do starting today. Write down your biggest financial regrets. All of them. Then write next to each one, this happened. I can't change it. What can I learn from this? Extract the lesson. Then write, what's my best financial action today? And do that action. That's the complete Stoic process. Acknowledge, accept, learn, act. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people waste years trapped in financial regret about unchangeable past while their present financial situation deteriorates from inaction. They feel terrible about yesterday's mistakes while making today's mistakes through paralysis and avoidance. Meanwhile, people who practice Stoic acceptance move forward, learn from mistakes without carrying shame, and build better financial futures. The question you need to answer is this: are you going to stay stuck in regret about financial mistakes you can't change? Or will you accept those mistakes and focus your energy on the financial choices you can make today? Because regret changes nothing about the past but ruins everything about the present. Chapter 8. Daily practice creates lasting change. You've learned Stoic principles for financial decisions, but principles without practice are just interesting philosophy. You understand that emotions shouldn't control spending, that you should focus on what you control, that comparison is destructive, that setbacks require calm response. But understanding doesn't create change, daily practice creates change. Here's why this matters. The Stoics didn't just study philosophy, they practiced it. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations as daily exercises. Epictetus taught his students through practical application. Seneca lived his principles. Stoicism isn't a belief system, it's a practice system. And if you're not practicing these principles daily with your actual financial decisions, you haven't learned Stoicism. You've just consumed information about it. Let me show you what's really happening right now. You're at a decision point. You can close this and let these principles become another set of ideas you agreed with but never implemented. Or you can commit to daily practice of one specific principle until it becomes automatic. Most people choose the first option. That's why most people's financial lives don't change despite consuming endless financial content. Pay attention to this part. Stoic financial practice doesn't require massive changes. It requires small, daily applications of principles to actual decisions. You see something you want to buy impulsively, you practice the pause. You start comparing yourself to someone else. You redirect to your own standard. You feel anxious about the future. You return to present facts in action. These small practices, repeated daily, rewire how you think about and handle money. Here's what makes implementation so critical. Your current financial habits are strong because you've practiced them for years. You've practiced impulse spending, emotional reactions, comparison-based decisions, catastrophizing setbacks. Those patterns are automatic. The only way to replace them is through deliberate practice of different patterns until those become automatic. Most people never implement because they try to change everything simultaneously. They decide they're going to stop impulse spending, stop comparing, stop catastrophizing, stop lifestyle inflation, and start everything else all at once. That's overwhelming. Overwhelm leads to paralysis. Paralysis leads to doing nothing. And doing nothing leads to the same results you've always gotten. This is where things change. Implementation isn't about perfection across all principles. It's about consistent practice of one principle until it becomes automatic, then adding the next. Choose one Stoic principle from this audiobook. Just one. The one that resonates most or addresses your biggest financial challenge. Then practice it daily for 30 days. One principle, 1 month, consistent practice. Think about compound effects. One Stoic principle practiced consistently for a year will transform your financial life more than 10 principles you understood but never practiced. Mastery of the pause eliminates impulse spending. Mastery of the dichotomy of control eliminates wasted mental energy. Mastery of comparison resistance eliminates pressure to keep up. One principle, truly integrated, changes everything. Here's the shift you need to make right now. Stop treating this like information to consume. Treat it like a practice manual. Choose one principle. Write down the specific daily practice. For example, every time I want to make a non-essential purchase, I will pause for 24 hours before deciding. Every morning, I will write down what financial factors I control today and focus only on those. Make it specific. Make it daily. Make it measurable. But there's a final psychological trap. You might think choosing just one principle is insufficient given the magnitude of your financial challenges. But that thinking is exactly what keeps people stuck. They need to do everything, so they do nothing. Meanwhile, people who master one principle at a time build cumulative change that eventually transforms their entire financial life. Most people won't commit to daily practice because it requires discipline without immediate rewards. You practice the pause for 2 weeks and you're not rich. You focus on controllable factors for a month and still face challenges. The results are incremental and initially invisible. But like compound interest, daily practice compounds into dramatic results that become visible over time. Here's what happens when you commit to daily practice of one principle. First, you notice how often your old pattern appears. The impulse, the comparison, the catastrophizing, whatever you're working on. That awareness is progress. Second, you practice the new response consistently despite it feeling awkward. Third, the new response starts feeling more natural and the old pattern starts feeling uncomfortable. And fourth, your financial decisions change automatically because the new pattern has become your default, and different decisions produce different results. And here's the part that determines your next 5 years. The Stoics understood that character is built through daily practice of virtue in small moments. You don't become financially disciplined by making one big perfect decision. You become financially disciplined by making small right decisions consistently in daily moments. That discipline, built through practice, not through understanding, is what creates lasting financial transformation. So here's what you do right now, before moving on. Complete this commitment. The one Stoic principle I'm practicing daily for the next 30 days is: fill in your choice. My specific daily practice is: write the exact action. I will track this practice by. Name your tracking method. I commit to 30 days of consistent practice before adding any additional principle. Write it down. Say it aloud. Make it real. Because this commitment, this decision to practice rather than just understand, is the only thing that determines whether this audiobook changes your financial life or becomes another piece of consumed content that made no difference. Here's the final uncomfortable truth. Most people will finish this, feel temporarily inspired, and do nothing differently. They'll have the same financial stress next month, next year, 5 years from now because they confused understanding principles with practicing principles. Meanwhile, people who commit to daily practice of one principle will experience gradual but cumulative financial transformation because they understood that Stoicism is a practice, not a philosophy to believe. The question you need to answer right now is this: are you going to practice Stoic principles with your actual financial decisions? Or will you just appreciate the ideas while continuing the patterns that keep you financially stuck? Because appreciation without practice produces nothing except the illusion of progress. Master the moment. Not through perfect understanding. Through daily practice. One principle. One decision at a time. Repeat it until calm, rational financial decision-making becomes who you are, not just what you know. What will you practice tomorrow?